There are some names in country music that don't just belong to a person, they belong to an era. Barbara Mandrell is one of those names. Say it to anyone who grew up watching primetime television in the early 1980s, and you'll see their eyes light up with recognition. The sparkle, the sequins, the steel guitar, the voice that could pull tears from a stone. For a generation of Americans, Barbara Mandrell wasn't just a country music star. She was the country music star. A woman who seemed to have been born performing, who mastered instruments before most children master long division, and who turned Saturday night television into something the whole family gathered around. But today, Barbara Mandrell is 75 years old, and the life she lives now, far from the floodlights, far from the screaming crowds, far from the recording studios and television sets that once defined her every waking hour, is one that many of her fans find difficult to sit with. Not because she's suffering in any dramatic sense, but because the silence surrounding one of the most vibrant women to ever grace a stage feels, in its own quiet way, deeply sad. When a flame that bright goes dim, the darkness it leaves behind has its own particular weight. So today we're going to talk about Barbara Mandrell, where she came from, what she built, what was taken from her, and how she lives now. Because her story is not just a country music story, it's a human story, and it deserves to be told with the honesty and care it has always warranted. Barbara Mandrell was born on Christmas Day in 1948, and it's almost too perfect, a gift to the world, arriving on the most celebrated day of the year. From the very beginning, music wasn't something Barbara did, it was something she was. By the age of 6, she was already playing the accordion under her mother's guidance. By the time most children were worrying about spelling tests, Barbara was mastering the steel guitar and saxophone, instruments that most adult musicians never dare to touch. Her father owned a music store, and that environment became her first classroom, her first stage, her first world. She wasn't just talented, she was extraordinary in a way that stopped people cold. At just 11 years old, she joined country musician Joe Mappis on a Las Vegas show, performing the steel guitar with a confidence and precision that left audiences speechless. A young girl standing on a Las Vegas stage, holding her own in a world dominated entirely by grown men. From there, she earned a regular spot on the California television program Town Hall Party, and spent her summers touring with legends like Johnny Cash and Patsy Cline, sharing hotel rooms with icons while still being young enough to be in middle school. Think about what that means for a moment. While her peers were at school dances and football games, Barbara Mandrell was on the road with the greatest names in American music, absorbing everything, learning everything, becoming something entirely her own. By the time she was 14, she was a key member of the Mandrell family band, playing everything from Beatles covers to classic country standards. She wasn't following a path, she was blazing one. She married her husband Ken Dudney in 1967, shortly after finishing high school. Ken, a former Navy pilot who gave up a promising military career to stand beside her, became the quiet foundation beneath her very loud success. Together they would build a family. 3 children, Matthew, Jamie, and Nathan, and somehow, against all odds, hold that family together through decades of chaos, pressure, and public life. By the late 1970s, Barbara Mandrell had become something rare in country music, a genuine crossover phenomenon. Songs like Sleeping Single in a Double Bed and If Loving You Is Wrong, I Don't Want to Be Right didn't just top the country charts, they crossed over into pop territory, reaching audiences who had never considered themselves country music fans. Her concerts weren't just concerts, they were full theatrical productions, elaborate costumes, choreography, multiple instrument changes, the kind of spectacle that made people feel they had witnessed something genuinely special. She won the Country Music Association's Entertainer of the Year award, not once, but twice, in 1980 and 1981, back-to-back. In a genre that was not always generous to its women, Barbara Mandrell stood at the absolute summit. She wasn't just competing with female artists, she was competing with everyone, and winning. And then came television. Barbara Mandrell and the Mandrell Sisters premiered on NBC in 1980, and America fell in love all over again. The show blended live music, sketch comedy, and genuine family warmth in a way that felt completely effortless, even though, behind the scenes, the effort was almost inhuman. The program drew an estimated 40 million viewers, 40 million people every week, tuning in to watch Barbara and her sisters Louise and Earlene bring the house down. Major entertainment legends including Ray Charles, Glenn Campbell, and Bob Hope all made appearances, lending the show a cultural weight that extended far beyond country music. But the cost of that success was staggering. Filming schedules ran 14 to 16 hours a day. Barbara was simultaneously recording music, touring, and filming television, a workload that would have broken most people. She began receiving cortisone injections in her vocal cords just to get through performances. When doctors warned her that continuing at that pace could cause permanent damage to her voice, the very instrument that had carried her to the top of the world, she made the painful decision to end the show after 2 seasons. It was the right call, but it was also the first sign that something would have to give. September 11, 1984. A date that didn't mean what it would later come to mean for America, but one that permanently divided Barbara Mandrell's life into a before and an after. She was driving near her Nashville home with 2 of her children when a 19-year-old college student's vehicle crossed the center line and struck her car head-on. The young man died instantly. Barbara survived, but barely, and at a cost that cannot be fully measured. She suffered a broken femur, a shattered ankle, serious knee damage, and a severe concussion that caused temporary brain damage. The physical injuries were brutal. The neurological damage was something else entirely. For a period following the accident, Barbara struggled to recognize herself. She reportedly spoke about herself in the third person, referring to the performer, the star, the woman she had been, as if that person were someone separate from the confused, injured woman lying in a hospital bed. The psychological distance between who she had been and who she now was created a kind of grief that had no clean name. It would take nearly 3 years of recovery before she felt anything close to herself again. What saved her children, and likely saved her life, was a decision made in the seconds before impact. She had noticed children riding unbuckled in a nearby vehicle and had instructed her own children to fasten their seatbelts and fastened her own. That single act of caution became the thread connecting her survival to her future purpose. After her recovery, she threw herself into seatbelt safety advocacy, becoming honorary chairman of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in 1985. She turned private pain into public purpose, which is the mark of a person with genuine character. But the ordeal didn't end with her physical recovery. Tennessee law required her legal team to file a lawsuit against the deceased young man's family, not out of malice, but as a necessary legal formality to access insurance coverage for her mounting medical expenses. The public didn't understand this distinction. The backlash was swift and cruel. Fans who had adored her turned on her. The woman who was still learning to walk again, still fighting through the fog of brain trauma, found herself being painted as greedy and heartless by people who didn't know the full story. She wrote about all of it in her autobiography, Get to the Heart My Story, which became a bestseller. Readers responded to her honesty, her vulnerability, the willingness to show them the woman behind the sequins. The book reminded America that the person they had celebrated for decades was exactly as real as they had always hoped she was. Barbara returned to performing after her accident. She released music, went on tour, tried to recapture something of what she'd had before, and in many ways, she succeeded. Her fans welcomed her back with open arms, but something had shifted permanently, in her body, in her spirit, and in her understanding of what she wanted from the years she had remaining. In 1997, at the age of 48, she walked onto the stage of the Grand Ole Opry one final time as a performing artist. She said goodbye to her audience, sold off her beloved collection of musical instruments, a gesture so symbolic it felt almost like a funeral, and stepped away from the career that had consumed her entire life. She briefly appeared on the soap opera Sunset Beach in 1998, a small creative detour that suggested she hadn't entirely closed the door on public life. But gradually, quietly, deliberately, Barbara Mandrell disappeared from the world that had made her famous. The arenas and television studios gave way to gardens and canvas. She took up painting. She spent time with her grandchildren. She embraced the slow rhythms of a life lived without a performance schedule or a public relations team shaping every word she spoke. The home she and Ken had purchased in 1988, Fontanelle, a magnificent log cabin mansion in the Tennessee Hills with 6 bedrooms, 13 bathrooms, and a helicopter pad, was eventually transformed into a tourist attraction, a hotel and music venue that allowed the public a small window into the world she had built and then chosen to leave behind. Barbara Mandrell is 75 years old. She lives privately, quietly, away from cameras and concert halls. She attends church. She paints. She tends to her garden. She spends time with her family, the family that through everything remained the truest constant in her life. In 2009, she was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, one of the genre's highest honors. The ceremony was deeply emotional. She paid tribute to her late father Irby, who had passed away just 2 months before the induction, acknowledging that his name was the one she was proudest to carry through those doors. It was the kind of moment that makes you understand how much a person carries with them, even after the spotlight fades. In 2022, she made a rare public appearance at the Grand Ole Opry to mark her 50th anniversary with the institution. She didn't perform. She stood in that hallowed space and simply existed within it, and somehow, that was enough. Artists like Carrie Underwood used the occasion to acknowledge openly what Barbara had done for women in country music, the doors she had kicked open, the standards she had set, the permission she had given every girl who ever picked up an instrument and dared to believe she could be taken seriously. And yet, there is something in all of this that sits heavy in the chest. Not because Barbara seems unhappy. By every available account, she has found a genuine peace that eluded her during the most celebrated years of her life, but because the world feels quieter without her in it. Because there is a particular melancholy in watching someone who gave so much of themselves to an audience, who sacrificed her health and her voice and her privacy and years of ordinary life, now living in near total anonymity. The transaction feels unequal, even if she herself made the choice freely. The accident took something from her that no amount of recovery could fully restore. The years of impossible schedules took something too. The public cruelty during her lawsuit took something. Fame, which she had pursued since childhood and achieved beyond anyone's reasonable expectations, ultimately extracted a price that would have broken most people entirely. That she survived, not just the accident, but all of it, and found her way to a peaceful life is genuinely remarkable. That is strength of an uncommon kind. But it is also true that the world she now inhabits is a very long way from the world she once lit up, and that distance is worth acknowledging, worth feeling, even. Barbara Mandrell gave this world something extraordinary. She showed that a woman could be the best in the room, at singing, at playing instruments, at commanding a stage, at hosting a television program, without apologizing for any of it. She carried herself with grace through success and through devastation alike. She told the truth about her life at a time when female artists were still expected to maintain a flawless public image, and in doing so, she gave her fans something more valuable than any hit record: the truth that no life, however glittering, is without its shadows. At 75, Barbara Mandrell is not performing, she is not recording, she is not chasing the spotlight that once chased her. She is living quietly, on her own terms, surrounded by the people she loves most. There is beauty in that. There is peace in that. But there is also, if we are honest, a certain sadness. The sadness of a magnificent voice no longer singing publicly. The sadness of a stage left dark. The sadness that comes when someone who gave so much is no longer here for us to applaud. She deserved better from fame. She deserved better from the industry. And she deserved better from the public that turned on her during the worst moment of her life. what she built, and what she endured, and who she became on the other side of all of it, that is a legacy worth far more than any award or chart position could ever measure. Barbara Mandrell, a legend, a survivor, and a reminder that behind every spotlight, there is always a human being, fragile and real, and worthy of our care.